The idea is to focus more on the stories themselves than strictly on the Zen tradition. However, so that we are not left without an introduction or some context in time, let us briefly discuss, in a few segments, some information about the Zen tradition. The essential point is for us to reflect on the stories. Many times in other lectures and on other occasions, I always mention that storytelling is an excellent way to anchor knowledge, and it is used in various traditions. India, for example, even used storytelling in the field of medicine. Education was entirely based on storytelling, because a story preserves an internal coherence that makes it very difficult to forget it halfway through, whereas a theoretical narrative of knowledge is much easier to forget. So imagine, for example, the story of Snow White. All of us who have long since left childhood behind, but even so, it is very difficult in the middle of the story of Snow White for you to forget the ending. The huntsman left the princess in the forest and, oh, I drew a blank, I forgot. No one forgets. If you recall the first scene, it usually unfolds all the way to the last. Isn't that so? That doesn't happen. A tale has one scene leads to another. It has a certain sequence that helps knowledge become firmly established. I often notice this in the classroom with my students. The little they retain is what is related to tales, to stories, because these truly help to fix knowledge. This is not something new. As I mentioned, this has been used by many people throughout history. So, the Arabs were great storytellers. As were the Indians, almost everything originated there. And the Eastern tradition as well. Zen is also very fond of using stories as a pedagogical tool. So today, let us get to know a bit of this tradition in some of my favorite tales. You might even be familiar with them, as they are not so original after all. But let us analyze them a bit and see the philosophical content they have to offer. You may be familiar with the idea that Buddhism is a religion that adapts greatly depending on the region where it arrives. Buddhism made its way, leaving India, where it was practically expelled, and journeyed through China. There, it blended very deeply with Confucianism and Taoism. Thus, Chinese Buddhism is unlike any other. It merges very deeply with local traditions. Then, it crosses China and arrives in Japan. We will skip that for now. Tibet, because in Tibet as well, when Buddhism arrives there, it blends with the Bonpo religion and forms Lamaism, which is absolutely original. It also has nothing to do with any other form of Buddhism in the world. And when it crosses over and goes to Japan, it encounters the Shinto tradition there. A tradition that is very natural, closely connected to nature, and deeply tied to natural phenomena. This also shapes Shinto, but Buddhism gives rise to a truly original form of Buddhism, which is Zen Buddhism. So, this ability of Buddhism to adapt to any religion is truly remarkable. In each place, it takes on a distinctive local color, without losing its fundamental structures from a philosophical perspective. Everywhere the ideas of dharma, karma, and reincarnation are present. However, local elements and aspects of the local culture are incorporated. Thus, we will see that Zen is a blend of Mahayana Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, and Shintoism. In other words, it incorporates everything it encountered along the path it traveled. When Buddhism passes through China, it is called Chan. When it enters Japan, it arrives as Chan or Zen. And back in India, it was called dhyana, which meant meditation, a concentration so deep on the object that you and it would merge as if you were one. So, from dhyana to shana, to Chan, to Zen. This was the journey of this concept. You may have perhaps heard about how this story began. Of course, many times these origins are more mythical than historical. In the religious context, it is necessary to have great skill and deep knowledge to be able to distinguish what is mythical, what is mystical, and what is historical. These are the three keys spoken of by Helena Blavatsky. So, some things will certainly be mythical, but it is said that it would have originated through this figure, Mahakassapa, who was a direct disciple of Buddha. Buddha would gather his disciples to deliver sermons to those who were most qualified, those who were capable of understanding his more metaphysical message. And one day, he gathers these disciples. They wait for him to give a sermon, and he appears and simply shows them a lotus, a white lotus. He does not utter a single word, and Mahakassapa attains enlightenment simply by seeing this white lotus. He understands the message. Thus, it is said that the idea of a direct lineage of knowledge transmission, without words, was born. Zen is very sparing with words. It practically does not speak. You will notice that it is very concise, and very little is said. So, this would have been the mythical birth of the Zen tradition. And the historical origin that is attributed, said to be historical, though even this is questioned, would be with Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma, whom some also believe to be a mythical figure, is said to have been an Indian monk who, at a certain point, decided to journey to China. China had already received visits from the first Indian monks and had undergone a significant conversion to Buddhism. Bodhidharma was eagerly awaited, as he was considered an extremely wise monk. He was awaited in particular by Emperor Wudi. This Chinese emperor had converted to Buddhism. And he was, let us say, materially very generous. He had ordered the construction of many monasteries, had commissioned the translation of numerous sutras, and considered himself to be spiritually very elevated. Because of this generosity, because of these deeds of his. When Bodhidharma arrives, the emperor receives him eagerly, awaits him, and asks, "After all that I have built, after everything I have done for Buddhism, what are my merits?" And Bodhidharma is said to have replied to him, "None." Because actions that seek merit have no value, none at all. And so the emperor, evidently, was not expecting such an answer. He is shocked. How can that be? No merit at all? Who are you to tell me that? Bodhidharma is said to have replied, "I don't know." He turns his back and walks away. And he never returns. He enters, goes into the interior of China, and there he begins his process of meditation. Some time later, someone is said to have explained Bodhidharma's answer to the emperor, revealing to him the essence of what that monk was trying to convey. The emperor realized his mistake and tried to persuade Bodhidharma to return. But Bodhidharma never returned, refusing to come back. He realized that the Buddhism present there was very superficial, and that there were no true disciples for him. He is said to have settled in a region deep within China, where he devoted himself to meditation. At this point, there are a number of stories, and we cannot distinguish clearly between history and legend. It is said that he spent many years meditating alone, facing a wall, in a state of profound contemplation. Until, at a certain moment, disciples began to arrive. And it was very difficult for him to accept disciples. There is a story about Huiku, which I find very beautiful. He was a general who had fought in many wars, a man deeply embittered because he could no longer find any meaning in what he did. He was a great victor in battles, but he had reached a point where winning or losing was all the same to him. There was no longer any meaning in his life. He was utterly exhausted. When he heard that there was a great master, he said, "Well, this is my last hope. Perhaps this great master has the answer to my deepest question, because if not, I will give up on life. There is no meaning left for me." It is curious, because when one is defeated, one often thinks that the answer lies in victory. And when one is victorious, where does the answer lie? He had achieved everything a general could possibly achieve, and yet he saw no meaning in life. He felt deeply anguished and went in search of Bodhidharma. It is said that when he arrived in the region where Bodhidharma was meditating, it was snowing. He placed himself before the space where Bodhidharma was, meditating beneath the falling snow. The master completely ignores him, and he refuses to leave without being received by Bodhidharma. He remains there, and the snow begins to fall. He stays put. It is said that when the snow had already reached his knees, and he stood absolutely motionless, rooted to the spot, Bodhidharma realized he truly would not be rid of him and decided to ask what he wanted. It is a dialogue with many details, but I will not go into too much detail. This is a scene that, in fact, is depicted in an ancient Chinese painting, which references this very moment when Bodhidharma would have ignored Ruweichue for a long time as he stood beneath the snow until finally deciding to listen to him. He turns to Ruweichue and asks, "What do you want from me?" And Ruweichue is said to have asked, "Master, deliver me from samsara." I don't know if you remember samsara, which is that wheel of days and nights within which human beings are trapped. The eternal return, the repetitive life that leads nowhere, this space-time existence bound to things that are fleeting, dawn, dusk, things always repeating themselves without any meaning, a world that is merely material. This is the samsara of the Indians. Ruechue would have said to him, "Oh, take me out of samsara." And Bodhidharma would have simply replied, "Who put you in it?" And Ruechue. With this answer, he realizes that the one who had placed himself in it was himself, mentally, and that it was simply that he no longer considered himself in it, he was out. With this answer, he lights up. He gets that shock because no one had put him in samsara. If not his own mental attitude, which had chosen to feel inside samsara. And it was enough for him to choose another attitude, to choose to be somewhere else, and he would already be there. And with this answer, simply, he becomes enlightened. It's curious, isn't it? Who put us in the situations where we feel enslaved? Who put us in the situations where we feel we are suffering? Is it not our own mental attitude that could not simply turn the mental key and feel on the outside? Who else could put us there, if not ourselves? So, with this answer, he becomes enlightened. And then begins what they call the sequence of patriarchs. Bodhidharma is considered the first patriarch, Ruki is considered the second, who continues his school. Much later, after several generations had passed, there comes a moment when the fifth patriarch emerges. And this fifth patriarch, already quite elderly, needed to choose a successor. And he did not see among his disciples, notice, this story already reveals how quickly decline set in. In just 4 generations, there was already a rapid decline. From the second to the fifth patriarch, there were no disciples whom he considered worthy of inheriting his bowl and his robe. He looked at his disciples and saw that they were all very superficial. But he, being very old, needed to pass on the robe and the bowl. So he decided to gather all his disciples and said the following, whoever writes, "The best verse on this wall will receive the succession of the Dharma. He will be my successor as patriarch of the Zen school." But before this, he had been observing his disciples. And on one occasion, he was there because that was a Zen monastery supported by the nearby community. And there were some people from the community who brought food, some people prepared food for the monks. And he was reciting a text, the Diamond Sutra, and his disciples, all attentive, were listening. And there inside, in the kitchen, there was a very humble peasant who was preparing food for them. And he notices that, when he recites the Diamond Sutra, his disciples react in a very superficial way. And the cook in the kitchen attains enlightenment. He was a very special person. His name was Huaining. He was a very simple man, very unrefined, a peasant who worked with complete humility to support the monastery, volunteering out of love. And he attains enlightenment. And the master sees that he was the noblest, the most elevated among them. But he thinks, well, these young men will not accept the cook as their master. Notice that the mentality had already declined quite a bit. They will not accept him. So he decides to set this test of the verse as a way to perhaps convince them of who truly had merit. And in this monastery, there was the eldest of the disciples, who was considered the most diligent, the strictest, the most disciplined. His name was Shinshu. And when it is said that the test would be this, everyone already considers Shinshu the winner. Because he was extremely dedicated and was considered very good, but the master saw that he was very rigid and quite superficial. In short, he sets the test and says, "Tomorrow, the best verse written on this wall will be my successor in the Dharma." And then, when everyone goes to bed, Shinshu, as expected, goes there and writes his verse. I even brought it for you because I find it quite interesting. Shinshu's verse. This body is the Bodhi tree. The soul is like a shining mirror. Be careful to always keep it clean, not allowing dust to gather upon it. And then, when people saw this verse, they said, "Wow, it's amazing. No one will write anything better than this." This is precisely about the soul as a mirror, which must be constantly purified so that dust does not accumulate upon it. It is a daily discipline of purification. And they went to sleep already considering that Shinshu would be the successor. When they woke up, there was another verse written below the previous one, in a very rough, poorly written hand, from a humble person who wrote in a way very rudimentary, but there was another verse there, which went as follows. The body is not like a tree. The bright mirror does not shine anywhere. If there is nothing from the beginning, where could dust accumulate? And then people were perplexed. Who wrote this? I don't know if you notice the subtlety, because too. And so we would need to talk a bit about the philosophical system and the system. Initiatic for the philosopher and the sage, because philosophy is the discipline of always removing the dust. The sage has already merged his mind, his soul, with the universal soul. If there is only one thing, where would dust accumulate? There is no mirror anywhere. Man no longer feels himself as a mirror of the sun. He is the sun itself. He merges. This is the state of a master at the level expected to lead a school like that, which was an inner school. So, when everyone sees that, they are very perplexed and no one knows who wrote it. And the master knew it was Huining, the cook. And then, knowing there would be no unity, that people would not accept a cook. As a master, he divides the school and sends Huining, along with those younger, more humble, and more advanced students who accepted him, to the south, while those who did not accept him remain at the school, together with Shinshu. A few decades later, 20 years on, Shinshu's school no longer existed. And Huining's school endured for much longer, lasting until his death. In other words, the master saw with great precision. Indeed, Huining possessed a much higher level. But these were the last known patriarchs of the Zen tradition. After that, the succession of patriarchs comes to an end, with the sixth patriarch, who is said to be this young man, originally a cook. So, how did this reach Japan? It arrived through two masters who traveled to China. Today, there are no longer just these two schools. There are at least 4 major Zen schools, already quite different from what they were in that era. But, in any case, Zen arrived in Japan through the Rinzai school, which was brought by the monk Eisai, and the Soto school, which was brought by the monk Dogen. Both arrived in the 12th and 13th centuries. Both survive to this day, with Soto being the largest Zen school in existence today. And each of them has its own peculiarities. Rinzai, for example, is the school of koans. Have you ever heard of koans? Those riddles that seem a bit nonsensical, which were presented to test the rational mind, that is, the human being. If one tried to approach them with the rational mind, it would not work because they made no sense. They were paradoxes. They were precisely meant to halt the rational mind and awaken intuition. And these were often used in meditation, and sometimes also served as a test for admission into the Zen school. The disciples would receive a koan, and whoever was able to present some solution the next morning would be admitted. If not, they would not. It was the Zen entrance exam, quite a challenging one. So Rinzai practiced koans, martial arts, and was, above all, the school of the samurai. The samurai were, in general, all practitioners of Zen Buddhism. And the other school, Soto, founded by Dogen, was the one that most practiced zazen, which is meditation in a specific posture, kneeling, for many hours, seeking to provoke what they call samadhi. A state of ecstasy in which a person transcends, for a few moments, multiplicity and overcomes the illusion of the separate mind. So, basically, this is a brief historical overview for you to become familiar with. Most of the schools, in addition to practicing their meditations, also dedicated themselves to all the tasks required to maintain the school itself. In other words, they prepared their own food and washed their own clothes. They also engaged in small meditative arts, which they believed were beneficial to organize and harmonize the mind, such as, for example, the famous art of the tea ceremony. This was something meticulously precise, the timing of the service, the position of the cup on the table, everything was highly ceremonial. Ikebana, which endures to this day. Calligraphy, which was considered among the samurai as a sign that whoever could skillfully wield a weapon could also skillfully wield a pen to write an ideogram. It was regarded as a symbol of a skillful person. Therefore, a good samurai had to know how to handle the pen well and create ideograms with perfection. This is very similar to what you will see. For example, within the Celtic tradition, it was believed that a man was a good archer when he was also a good harpist and poet. The good warriors, had to be harpists and poets. They would often go into battle, plucking their harps and singing. The bards would go at the front of the armies. So there was this certain union between art and war, between Venus and Mars. As it is in Rome, the union between love and war, between duty and the warrior aspect. Well, now we move on to the stories themselves. I hope that at least some of them will be new to you, that they will be a novelty, but even with the familiar ones, we will try to bring forth interesting content. Polishing a stone. It is said that there was a young disciple who stood in meditation in the gardens of a temple for a very long time. And the master would pass by and see that he never left, that he spent an enormous amount of time in meditation. Then the master decided to approach him and ask, "My young friend, what are you doing?" "Ah, I am concentrating so that my mind becomes like the mind of the Buddha." Then the master, silently, without saying a word, left, picked up a roof tile and a file. He sat down next to the young man, and as the young man tried to meditate, the master began to file the tile. And the young man, trying to concentrate, heard the sound of the tile being filed, until the young man blurted out, "What are you doing, sir?" "Ah, I want to turn this tile into a mirror." "Sir, you are crazy. No matter how hard you work, this tile will never become a mirror." Then the master turned to him and said, "But you are the one who is crazy. No matter how hard you work, your mind will never be the same as the Buddha's. That is not how one should work." The young man was struck by this and asked, "But then how? What should I do?" And he said, "Well, if you want a carriage to move, do you strike the cart or the horses?" "The horses, of course. Then why are you striking the cart?" For those who have studied the philosophical traditions, which say that human beings have a physical, material part and a spiritual part, if you want the spirit to develop, why keep sacrificing the body? As if this martyrdom would generate some kind of spiritual merit? Strive to develop deep reflections, strive to cultivate a true spiritual life, which is measured more by actions, by virtues, by a coherent life, than by simply remaining still, trying to sacrifice and suppress the personality, without any gain for the spirit. So, this idea, which is very common in various religious traditions, of excessively sacrificing the personality so that the spark of the spirit may be born, to sacrifice it in vain, is foolishness. If you strike the carriage, it will not move. You have to strike the horses. In other words, develop a way of life that inspires you, that uplifts you, that awakens spirituality within you. I find this quite interesting, because it shows that even the Zen school, this is an old tale, was not so devoted to meditating all day long in that way. Meditation had its limits, it had its application, but there was a need for a coherent practical life that truly developed spirituality. In other words, the idea of sacrifice as having merit in itself. The scorpion, this one is very well known. It circulates all over the internet in every way. I think there were two monks washing their clothes at the river and when one of them looks, he sees a scorpion drowning. He goes over and saves the scorpion. The scorpion stings him. And it's a painful sting, but he continues there, washing his clothes. Doesn't the scorpion go and fall into the water again? He goes over, saves it, and the scorpion stings him again. Then the other monk, watching, says, "But why are you doing this? That scorpion is ungrateful. You are saving its life and it is stinging you?" And then he turns to him and says, "I am not understanding the reason for your astonishment. Each one does what is in their nature to do. He is a scorpion, he stings. I am a human, I have compassion. Isn't it natural that each one does what is proper to them? It would be strange if the scorpion had compassion and I were the one to sting." In other words, each one acts according to their role within the order of nature. Everything is perfect, each thing in its proper place. That is, I will not respond like a scorpion, for I am not a scorpion. And many times, in our relationships, we do just that. Someone attacks us, and we place ourselves exactly at the same level. There is a passage I always like to draw parallels for you, so you can see how these traditions are universal. A passage that I find very beautiful, which reminds me of this, is when Alexander the Great meets the Celts on the banks of the Danube River and speaks with the Druid Diviciacus. And Alexander asks this Druid, what is it that the Celts fear? Because, in truth, they were a people known for being utterly fearless, and Diviciacus is said to have replied to him, well, a Celtic warrior is trained to fear only one thing. That is, that the sky might fall from its place upon the earth, or that the earth might rise from its place toward the sky. If the earth remains in its place, doing what it must, and the sky remains in its place, doing what it must, then we do what we must, and there is nothing to fear, each thing in its proper place. Do you understand? Each one with its own identity, fulfilling its own role, there is nothing to fear. I am human and I act as a human. The earth acts as the earth. The sky is the sky. The scorpion is a scorpion. I do not respond at the level of those who attack me. I respond as a human being. I find this story very interesting, very beautiful. It is widely shared, but I am not sure if people truly reflect on its content. The story of the theft is also quite well known. A group of young disciples who belonged to a monastery noticed that this very old, centuries-old monastery was falling apart, crumbling to pieces. It needed to be restored. But they were mendicant monks. They had no resources at all. Where would they find the means to buy materials and renovate that monastery? Let us speak with their master. The master was in meditation and decided to set a test for those young men. When the young men approached him, "Master, the monastery needs to be restored. We are in a critical situation. It is falling apart." "Yes, young ones, you are right. It truly is falling apart. But what will we do? We have no resources. We have nothing. Where are we going to get the means for this?" "Ah, I know. I have an idea." "You know that community nearby?" "Yes, of course, we know it." "Well then, go there and steal." "What?" "Yes, steal as much as you can. With that, we generate wealth and carry out the renovation, the monastery. But there is one detail. You cannot be seen by anyone. No one can see you stealing, because you know that the reputation of our monastery is very strong and has been passed down for generations. Therefore, no one can see you stealing. Go there and steal, as long as no one sees you." Then the disciples are left with that somewhat shocked expression, just like you are right now, aren't you? "What do you mean? Steal? What do you mean? Has the master gone mad? Could it be that he has lost his mind?" "No, but the end justifies it. The ends justify the means, Machiavellianism, Zen. Should we go? We will not. Steal or not steal?" "All right," the master commanded, "so let's go." So they went to the city to steal. The master rises calmly and enters the monastery. As he enters, there is a young man there, as usual, going about his tasks. He asks, "My young friend, what are you doing here?" "Well, master, what do you mean? What am I doing here?" "I am fulfilling what you asked of me." "Fulfilling what I asked?" "But all the other young people went to the city to steal. Why were you the only one who stayed?" "Master, you said I shouldn't steal, and that if anyone saw me, I shouldn't let anyone see me." I am seeing myself all the time. How could I steal? And the master understood that only that young man had truly grasped the real message. Notice that behind this, we could discuss for hours. Because this is the great difference between what we call the ethics of coercion and the ethics of conviction. As Plato used to say, you are what you do when the last door closes behind you. A person who acts ethically only when being watched does not respect themselves. They do not feel that within themselves there is an observer, that within them there is something divine. This is what is called ethics for show. As long as ethics is only this, it is not true ethics. When a person, to act honorably, out of a profound respect for the being that dwells within, that is true ethics. As long as we act only for appearances, this is not real. It is a veneer with very little coverage, and we see that even the slightest exceptional situation causes this veneer to fall away. Or have you not seen this? The earth trembles, a natural disaster occurs, and people take advantage of it to loot stores. To incite disorder, often even people from the middle class. Haven't you seen this? In Chile, in England, everywhere, in other words, even among so-called very civilized peoples, ethics is just a veneer, not something deep. They do not feel observed from within, but always from the outside in. If no one sees what I am, a beast, there is no depth. And what he sought was a disciple who felt appreciated by his own soul, who felt seen by his own soul. There is always a passage that I find beautiful within this theme that philosophy brings of comparative study. It is good for us to draw from one tradition here, another there, isn't it? This one is from the Egyptian tradition. It is a prayer that exists in an Egyptian temple. The Book of Powerful Chants. In this Book of Powerful Chants, it says the following: O disciple, your name is greater than the gods. The name of your God, seated at the center of your boat. For a moment, pause your journey, lay down your oar, turn around and look face to face at the God who dwells at the center of your boat. This Book of Powerful Chants is very interesting and, of course, mysterious, as everything in Egypt is. Imagine that you are rowing. This here is the boat. You are rowing, guiding this boat through winding paths. And at the center of your boat, there is a God observing all of this. At some point, we must stop moving, lay down the oar, turn around, and look him in the eye. And realize that there is a divine being within us at the center of our boat. And knowing that we carry this divine being, we must not expose him to indignities, nor take him just anywhere. Do you understand this? This idea of feeling something divine within us. A thirst for God, which is also very well known. I myself, even in the classroom, I love to tell this story because I find it so beautiful, and it also carries a wealth of meanings. There was a young man who very much wanted to be accepted by a master. A Zen story, you know, most of them begin this way. It is a disciple wishing to be accepted by a master. Once you said that, you've already told half the story. Most of them are like that. And this young man wanted to be accepted, and he knew that when he went to present himself to the master, the first thing the master would ask was, "Why do you want to be my disciple, young man?" Obviously, right? That's what he's going to ask. Depending on the answer I give to that question, it will be decided whether I will be accepted or not. So, he had to rehearse that blessed answer very well. And so he rehearsed. He stood in front of the mirror and made faces and expressions. He searched for this one, that one, another. This works. Then he rehearsed, performed, and thought, now ready. And he goes to speak with the master. When he arrives, the master is in meditation. Master, yes, my young friend, how may I help you? Well, you see, it's just that I would like to be your disciple. Then the master pauses, thinks for a few seconds, turns to him and says, "But why do you want to be my disciple?" That's the cue, right? He knew the master would ask that. He had rehearsed it thoroughly. So he straightens up, takes a stance, and begins to recite his script. Master, I would like to be your disciple because I feel a desperate thirst for God. Then the master pauses, thinks. He stands up, begins to walk, and invites the young man to follow him. The young man is absolutely thrilled. That must have been a sign that I was accepted. It worked. He starts walking behind him. Then, the master kneels at the edge of a river and tells the young man to kneel beside him. He thinks, wow, this must be some kind of acceptance ritual. Things are going wild. Then, when he kneels beside the master grabs his head and poof, pushes it into the river and holds it there. And he starts to struggle and holds it. These masters tend to be strong. Martial arts practitioners, right? And holds it. And the young man is thrashing about, almost drowning. He lets go. What is this? Are you trying to kill me, sir? What are you doing, sir? Calm down, calm down, calm down. Just answer me one thing. When you were down there, did you feel a desperate thirst? For what? For air, master, of course. Exactly. When you feel a desperate thirst for God, as strong as the thirst for air you felt down there, come to me and I will accept you. Do you understand this? It may seem like madness to you, but to some extent, as philosophers, we know what this is. To a certain, very subtle degree, we know what it is, at a certain moment, to no longer find meaning in absolutely anything. To keep searching for 2 or 3 good reasons to get out of bed and not find them anymore. Because life is so repetitive, so meaningless, with nothing vertical, nothing luminous, nothing worthy. Always the same thing, always the same thing. It's the terrible discouragement that strikes the idealist before they discover a more vertical sense of life. Before they discover a more philosophical sense of life. It is like a barrenness, an absolute desert. And here a very beautiful fairy tale comes in, which is Rapunzel. Remember when the prince, for those who know children's stories, for those who had a childhood, when the prince is thrown from the tower by the witch and becomes blind, that is, the blindness of the spirit, Rapunzel is cast into a desert. And she must search, search, and search until she once again becomes worthy of regaining her spiritual vision. The human soul, like Rapunzel, when it finds nothing spiritual, when its spirit is blind, feels as if it is in a desert. Absolutely without any prospects. It is truly like suffocation. It is a lack of air, a lack of motivation to go on living. When this reaches a level of anguish such that life no longer has any meaning unless it is vertical and luminous, well, that is the moment when this disciple would be ready. A bit of this thirst, because what lies ahead is also present here. I always remind you of this. It is also a very interesting Buddhist tradition. We have a reading group here at the school on Wednesdays, and one of the books we read, some of you here even took part in this, was a very beautiful book that tells the life of Buddha, which is the Light of Asia. And in one passage from this book, the already enlightened Buddha speaks about this. That what is finds its roots in the past, because otherwise it could not sprout here. And what will be in the future finds its roots in the present. Do you understand? Even if our thirst is not as desperate as that of a sage, but rather a thirst for verticality, for light, it has been present since the very beginning of the awakening of philosophy. This passage from the Light of Asia is truly, truly beautiful. After Buddha attained enlightenment, after wandering the world for so long, he returned precisely to the city where he was born, where he sought his father, his wife who had been left behind, and Yasodhara. And both of them became his disciples. Then, as he was speaking with his disciples, giving a sermon, they asked him, "Master, what was it like for you to make your own wife your disciple?" And he said, "Look, many incarnations ago, I was a pearl diver, and Yasodhara was my wife. We were very poor, and in the region where we lived, there were no more resources. So I left to try to find a pearl that could rescue us from our misery. And Yasodhara waited for me. When I returned, there had been a great drought in that region, and a terrible famine had struck. I found a huge pearl, worthy of a king. And I came back home with it, intending to give it to my wife and rescue us from our misery. But when I arrived, I found her in agony, dying of hunger. So I took that magnificent pearl, worthy of a king, which I had found, and went out into the streets asking who would exchange it for a plate of food. And I managed to get a plate of food that saved Yasodhara's life. What I did in that life, I have just done again now. I gave up all my riches, all the luxury of my life, the pearl of my life, to find food for Yasodhara and save her spiritual life. I simply fulfilled in its final dimension what I had already been rehearsing for many incarnations, because that which is cannot have failed to always be present as a seed. In that past, do you understand? This desperate thirst for God. Well, in the present, it is already here. That profound need for a sense of life that gives us a little more light, that further justifies our existence, that makes things begin to have more meaning. So, that which was must find seeds. That which is must find seeds in the past. That which will be must find seeds in the present. Heaven and hell, also quite well known. Once again, a master, always the same story. In this story, there was a samurai who came to this master, who was very wise. He had heard something about the concept of heaven and hell. Various explanations, many people talking about it. He approached, very curious to know what it was all about. It was a concept that, within his upbringing, he had never heard of before. So he approaches the master and asks, "Master, I have come to talk about what heaven and hell are. What truly are heaven and hell? Do these things exist? What are they?" And the master decides to put him to a test, to show him, in a concrete way, what heaven and hell truly are. He turns to him and says, "But you really are an idiotic soldier. What kind of king would make a stupid man like you a general? Someone like you? Look at how miserably you dress, it's ridiculous." The general feels deeply offended by this, draws his sword, and moves to attack the master. And the master says, "The gates of hell have opened. This is hell." And the general stops with his katana, realizes what has just happened, and understands. He recognizes the master's wisdom, sheathes his sword again, and kneels at the master's feet. And the master says, "The gates of heaven have opened. Both heaven and hell reside within man. They are the ceiling and the floor of our consciousness. The highest point it can reach, and the lowest. Heaven and hell. Everything that exists outside is also represented within man. Heaven and hell." I find this explanation beautiful because so often we oscillate between these two worlds, and we must understand that, in truth, this is the heaven to which we must aspire to ascend. This one is well, which is quite well known. What is selfishness? How does the story begin? Give me a hint. Everyone already knows it. A master and a candidate for discipleship. In this case, the candidate for discipleship was a king. And he was not just any king, he was a very generous king. In that king, there was no poverty. He was generous and distributed his wealth to everyone. He was truly a very just and very good king. But his dream was to be accepted by that master as a disciple, and he was not accepted under any circumstance. How strange! It was the only thing he wanted to have and could not attain. Yet he would always come to sit at the master's feet, to listen to his teachings and everything else. One day he arrives, and the master, deep down, wished to help that man who was truly good understand why he was not yet ready to be his disciple. And on that day he found an opportunity. The king comes to him and says, "Master, today I heard about selfishness and I did not understand this concept. I would like you to explain to me what selfishness is." Then the master decides to put him to the test. He pretends to be enraged, his face turns red, and with a furious expression, he says, "What a foolish question! How can you be so foolish as to ask me such an absurd question? How ridiculous!" At that, the king jumps up. "How can you speak to me like that? What do you think I am? Show some respect. I am a king." Then the master says, "Do you see? there is selfishness. Do you understand this? The generosity of this king was limited to the physical realm, giving material things. But he was not prepared to give up his image, to let go of his vanity, to give up his prestige, to relinquish the need to be respected. In other words, on the emotional level, he was selfish. He was not willing to surrender his honors. This is interesting because, generally, throughout history, at least in our recent history, we tend to consider a person great when they possess many things. Isn't that so? If a person needs to have many things in order to be great, then the greatness belongs to the things, not to the person. A person is truly great when they give many things. A person is as great as their generosity. There comes a certain moment when, if you give on one level, life will ask you to give on a subtler level. It becomes more difficult. There will come a time when you will say, not this. That's all right, life will respect that. But that is your measure. A person is as great as their generosity. The moment you reach the not this, know that this is your measure. That is your limit. The measure of this king was a measure of generosity that was merely physical, which is the easiest of all. When it came to an emotional generosity that required no recognition, he could no longer go further. Beyond that, he was no longer capable, he could no longer keep up. And it is a high price. Pause to reflect on this. It is quite a costly price. Certainty and doubt. This is a tale attributed to the Buddha himself. The Buddha was in meditation, accompanied by his disciple who was always with him, Ananda. And a young man arrives and asks the Buddha, Lord, does God exist? And the Buddha is said to have replied, yes, he exists. And this young man leaves. Soon after, another young man appears and asks, Lord, does God exist? And the Buddha is said to have replied, no, he does not exist. And Ananda was observing everything. And the young man goes away. A third young man arrives and asks the same question, Lord, does God exist? And the Buddha is said to have replied, find the answer for yourself. It may be so, it may not be. Discover the answer on your own. And Ananda, faced with this, was perplexed. But how is that possible, Master? Isn't that completely inconsistent? How so, inconsistent, my disciple? Yes, all three young men asked the same question, didn't they? And you gave them completely different answers? No, I answered the same thing. Didn't you understand? No, you didn't understand, because you only see them from the outside. The first young man who came here had absolute trust in me. Whatever I said, he would take as truth and follow it. So I told him, yes, God exists. The second one had absolutely no trust in me. And he came with a completely argumentative spirit. Whatever I said, he would believe the opposite. So I said, no, God does not exist. And the third was a man who had a great need to discover things for himself. Anything I gave him ready-made, he would not accept. So I said, seek. I said the same thing, according to the possibility and the need that each one had. According to the condition that each one had to listen. Do you understand this? This is sometimes complex and delicate to understand. There is an Indian epic, the Ramayana, where Rama, who was a great prince, once said exactly this: that the art of wisdom consists in always saying not a word more, not a word less, than what each person can and needs to hear. To know how to say things in a way that truly touches people's hearts in the right way. Not to become so attached to external forms. There is another Buddhist tale that also illustrates this story very well, quite well known, part of the Jataka tales, which tells of a father who lived with several children in an old house, many young children who no longer had a mother. For him, it was very difficult to control all those children. One day, he realizes that the house is on fire. And then he thinks, if I say, the house is on fire, and start chasing after them, they don't know what fire is. They'll think it's a game. They'll think it's a game of tag. Each one will run in a different direction, I won't be able to catch them all, and many will end up dying. Then he has an idea. He runs outside the house, and from there he starts shouting, "Children, there's a party out here. A lot of sweets are being handed out. Come quickly." And all the children come out. He saves them all. So, what did he say? Was it the truth or was it a lie? So, it's interesting that you will notice in all these traditions something very similar to what Plato says in a dialogue, which is the hippie is minor. Minor. That truth corresponds to the will of the gods and not to the facts. Truth corresponds to the good, and not to the facts. Philosophically, truth would have to be considered in this way. And that is exactly what happens here. What is truth? It is what each person needs to hear in order to grow. That is the truth. And a master like this is able to know what it is. Meditating with cats. Does anyone know this one? It's quite funny and curious. It is said that there was a master who meditated alone in his hermitage. A very simple little hut. And there was a young man who dreamed of becoming his disciple. Of course, it always starts this way. This one truly had no level to be his disciple. But the master had a certain mercy for him, because he liked the master very much. He lived around there, cooked his food, did everything to serve him. He was very humble. The master allowed him to stay around, but he really wasn't at the right level. The master had a cat. On one occasion, he was meditating and the cat was there. It's that annoying thing when it wants attention at any cost. The master was trying to meditate and the cat would climb on him, the cat would rub against him, the cat would lick him, the cat would meow, and the cat would disturb him in every possible way. So, while he was meditating, he took the belt from the clothes he was wearing and tied the cat to a column in his hut. He left the cat there until he finished meditating. And the young man watched all of this. Some time passed, and the master decided to wander the world for a while, seeking disciples and spreading his knowledge, as was common in those days. And the young man said, "Let me accompany you." He replied, "No, I'll take you." "As my disciple?" "You're not my disciple." "Then let me stay here, guarding for your return." The master felt very sorry for him and said, "All right, stay here, keep watch and take care of it. If one day I return, the house will still be here." The master left, and the people of that community, seeing that the young man had lived with the master, considered him a disciple and believed he had taken the master's place. And indeed, he assumed this role as if he were a sage. Years went by, and after a long time, the master returned to that region. When he passed through the nearby village, a fair was taking place. He hears people shouting, "Cats for meditation, the best cats for meditation. Buy your cat here. This is a special cat for meditation. No one can meditate without a cat tied to a post." So he goes to ask what that was all about. He approaches the merchant and asks, "Don't you know about this?" The master, who lives in the such and such hut, said that no one can meditate unless they tie a cat to the post. No one can achieve a good level of concentration otherwise. And then he understands what had happened. He goes there, corrects what had taken place, puts things in their proper place, and learns from this the way in which people absorb things. Things that come from outside. This is what is called empty ritualism. The belief that, simply by performing certain actions, we gain some level of spirituality. And often, many traditions that originally symbolized something meaningful, such as lighting a candle, which is something very beautiful, because it represents the very act of a person kindling a light within themselves. But from the moment this completely loses its symbolism. And if you believe that the mere act of lighting a candle brings you some spirituality, do you realize that you are just tying a cat to a pole? Or any ritual, for that matter. If you think it has value in itself, rather than for the state of consciousness it awakens in a person. A person is like a candle that has come into the world to give light. Therefore, symbolically, this represents him. But when it no longer represents anything, and you believe that the mere mechanical act of doing it brings some spiritual benefit, do you realize that we are tying a cat to a pole? It is an empty and mechanical ritualism, which can give rise to fanaticism. So, this story is exemplary and shows exactly this moment, this origin of such human behavior. The glass of water with salt. This one is also very beautiful and interesting. A young man complained to a Zen master about the difficulties he had been going through. That his life was full of suffering, that he endured much pain, and that this always kept him very sad. And how could he overcome this? Such great adversity, such a complicated life. Then the master takes him into his hut and shows him a bowl of salt. He asks him to dip his hand in, fill his hand with salt, and close it, holding the salt inside his hand. Then he brings a glass to the young man and asks him to put his hand into the glass, open it, and let the salt fall inside. And the young man does so. Then the master shakes the glass and says, "Drink." And the boy takes a sip and he asks, "What does it taste like?" "It's horrible, master, very salty." And then the master asks him to repeat the same process. Dip your hand into the pot of salt, fill your hand with salt, and walk with it. And go to a river. Dip your hand into the river and open it. And so the young man does exactly that, and the master asks, "Now, taste the water from the river." The young man tastes it. How is it? Delicious, fresh, it has a wonderful flavor. And what changed? Did the salt change? In quantity or in taste? It's not about changing the adversities of life. It's about transforming yourself from a cup into a river. And adversities will no longer change your flavor. They will no longer make your life bitter. Do not fight against adversities. They are what they are and always will be. Transform yourself from a cup into a river. Expand, grow. And you will realize that these adversities will no longer change the tone of your life. In other words, to think. In fact, there is a very interesting maxim from a Roman philosopher, Epictetus. Those who know are aware that he was once a slave, right? Epictetus, he used to say this. On one occasion, they said, "Ah, but you are a slave. How can you consider yourself a philosopher?" And he replied, "Do you know what a slave is? It is someone who, when faced with what cannot be changed, keeps fighting against it, and when faced with what can be changed, does nothing. That is a slave. They struggle against unchangeable things. It's like a donkey fighting a knife tip. When he could change things, he does nothing. How common is this? What can he change? He can transform himself from a cup into a river. That he is able to do. To change the taste or the amount of salt that he cannot do, that depends on a series of life circumstances. Sometimes, due to one's own karma, it is not possible to change either the taste or the amount of salt. But to transform oneself from a cup into a river, that is possible. It is entirely within one's power to make this transformation. How common this kind of attitude is, isn't it? Sometimes I see people here. We are in a place that is very prone to traffic jams. Sometimes people arrive in the classroom feeling nervous because of the traffic. The traffic. Well, we cannot change the traffic at this moment. But we can leave half an hour earlier, can't we? We fight against the traffic, but we do not fight against our own management of time. That we do not do. That we could change. Why not? And this epithet was a behavior of enslavement. To keep struggling against that which we cannot change. And when it comes to what we can change, we simply remain patient. Where do we go after death? It is said that there was a master, once again, very old, already quite an elder. This master was known throughout his life for his wisdom and kindness. He was considered an impeccable, exemplary man. And then a young man approaches him and says, "Well, master, your life is coming to an end, isn't it?" "Yes, disciple, there is little time left for me now. My age is quite advanced, It is the natural course of life. That's right, you are going to pass away and go straight to heaven, aren't you? Then the master looks at him and says, "What do you mean, to heaven? Of course I will go to hell." The young man is terrified. "You, sir, to hell? Just imagine, if he were to go to hell, who would have any chance at all? You, sir, to hell? That's madness." "Madness? Of course I will go to hell. You are the one who is mad. But, master, with all the good you have done, how could you possibly go to hell? If I do not go to hell, then who will be there to bring you out?" Do you understand this? I really like this story because I find it fascinating, the idea of transferring selfishness from the material plane to another, from the physical plane to a metaphysical one. So, I stopped chasing after saving my own skin in the physical realm, only to save my own skin elsewhere, in the metaphysical plane. In other words, I will go to an idyllic and wonderful place. I have simply transferred my selfishness to another realm. What is this idyllic and wonderful place where you will be? Knowing that there are so many people suffering somewhere, and you are doing nothing for them. Do you realize that you have simply transferred your selfishness to another plane and have not freed yourself from it? If there is a single person in hell, there will be two, because I will be there as well. You cannot sublimate selfishness because it remains selfishness. And, as Helena Blavatsky used to say, spiritual selfishness is worse than physical selfishness. So I am generous here and selfish on another plane. Well, I have not overcome selfishness, I have only postponed it. It is an investment to have the means to exercise it, or perhaps not even more comfortable conditions. Selfishness must either be banished from all worlds, or it will be present in all of them. If I simply want to save my own skin in the hereafter, I am still trying to save my own skin here. If there are two suffering, if there is one suffering, there will be two, because I will be with them. Otherwise, we simply transfer this selfishness to another plane. This materialism and this desire to escape adversity, you, selfishly, alone. Therefore, in fighting against selfishness, we must banish it from any world that exists, from this one and from any other worlds that may come to exist. Well, and finally, we are coming to the end. The Stonebreaker, which is also a very interesting story and quite well known. It is said that there was a man who worked in a profession considered very humble. He worked in a quarry, filling a cart with broken stones, breaking the base of the mountain, removing stones, loading them into the cart, and taking them to a nearby village, where houses and other things were built with those stones. And he was there, under the sun, carrying out this work, his trade, when suddenly he saw a litter pass by, carrying a minister. And all the people around were bowing, paying their respects, and he said, "Wow, what an unhappy life I have! Look how good it is to be a minister!" Sheltered from the sun, people around him, showing reverence, so much recognition. The best thing in the world is to be a minister. That's what I wanted to be. Then it seems the gods decided to put him to the test. And he, automatically, as soon as he thinks this, becomes a minister. When he realizes it, he is inside that palanquin, with people around him flattering and fanning him. Suddenly, out of nowhere, they drop everything to the ground, leave him alone, and run off, because just ahead, the prince was passing by, who was much more powerful than the minister. No one was going to flatter the minister when the prince was passing by. They leave him on the ground and run over there. He looks, and what happened? Ah, it's the prince. Goodness! The best thing in the world isn't to be a minister, it's to be a prince. Just look. There, yes, there are honors, people around you, serving you food, fanning you all the time, flattering you. No one abandons you for anyone else. The best thing in the world is to be a prince. Automatically, he becomes the prince. Ah, now yes. Today is my lucky day. Now, I am the greatest. Everyone pays me honors. Suddenly, he sees that people also drop his litter on the ground and run off in all directions. It was a scorching, intense sun, and people began to be unable to bear the heat on their heads and ran to seek refuge in the shade. He looks at that sun, casting its rays in all directions. The truly powerful one is the sun. What is this business about princes and ministers? Just look. It is the sun that makes people run in all directions. It determines, it gives light, it gives life. He who is the mighty sun. I would truly like to be the sun. Instantly, he becomes the sun. Now, yes. Then he casts his rays, scorches, burns crops, dries up swamps, and feels all-powerful. Suddenly, as he is casting his rays, over the earth, a cloud appears, larger than anything. He sends out his rays, but nothing reaches the earth. That enormous cloud stands before him. He sends out his rays, but the cloud is an obstacle. He says, "Wow, this can't be. What a rock this cloud is. Just look at it. No one can get past it. It prevents me from reaching the world. It is the one with power." What would it be like to be this cloud? Instantly, plim, he becomes the cloud. Do you understand? Then he feels all-powerful, casting shadows over the earth, sending rain, casting lightning. Suddenly, with all that power, he bumps into something hard, something that does not yield. He bumps into it again, and that thing won't move out of the way and starts to shatter him. When he looks at what was shattering and destroying him, he sees a great, an enormous mountain. Wow, now that's truly powerful, this mountain, huh? Look, cloud. None can stand against it. When I crash against it, it shatters me into 1,000 pieces. It doesn't move even a millimeter. What I really wanted was to be that mountain. Then, when he says this, plim, he becomes the mountain. Enormous, towering, the clouds passing over its peak, he feels immensely powerful. Now I am the most powerful on earth. No one can do anything to me. Suddenly, she hears a little noise, plim, plim. What the devil is that? What is that now? Plim, plim. When she looks down, it's a stone breaker, demolishing her. In other words, the eternal return. It shows that all beings are equally powerful when they find their identity. They sanctify what they do. They find their role in nature. All beings are powerful. As Plato used to say, everything in its place. Justice, to give each one what is rightfully theirs. When each one finds their identity, everything is justified. And there is nothing that is dishonorable, nothing that is superior or inferior. Everything comes into harmony. It is also a beautiful story. Well, and finally, just so you know, a text that is a sutra from the Zen school. As I mentioned to you, Zen has almost no texts. And this small sutra is one of the few sacred texts that are used, or were used in the ancient Zen school, which is the Mahaprajna Paramitha Sutra. Go together, beyond the beyond, until the ultimate reality. All these stories point in the same direction: the search for identity, the search for fraternity, the search for unity, the quest for each one to assume their role, the search to find the divine within oneself, and above all, to walk together. To consider humanity is one of the interesting things we see masters mentioning repeatedly throughout history. We are not interested in human beings who liberate themselves alone. We are interested in human beings who commit themselves to humanity. What matters to us are human beings who are committed to the whole. These are the ones who are valid. These are the ones who are important. In other words, go forth, but go forth together. Beyond the beyond, until the ultimate realization. A short verse, yet very profound and full of meaning. Well, this was basically what I will bring to you. Some stories that I often use in the classroom. I find them all very beautiful. I hope you enjoyed them.